Hey guys, this is um, the music video I promised you yesterday. um, I grew up, like most people, listening to what my parents listened to before I developed more of my own independent likes and dislikes in music. Um, my father was 50s and 60s. My mother was country, although my father liked country. Um, the only rock and roll other than 50s and 60s. The only rock and roll that my mother liked was 70s stuff and early 80s. She liked Bob Seger, she liked Meatloaf, and she liked the ladies. Laura Branigan, Linda Ronstadt, and Pat Benatar. So that's what I knew. She liked the Culture Club. But we would hear that on TV occasionally, and that would be about it. When I was in 6th grade, I finally started getting along with my class. And it was because my 6th grade teacher, who had taken over for our retiring 6th grade teacher. Fortunately, her husband was in failing health and she wanted to spend the remainder of his time with him. I think she has since passed away too. So we got a new teacher, brand new teacher, first year teaching. He also happened to be the son of one of our most disliked teachers. So we're going, at least I was, and I think other people were too. Oh no, her son, but he ended up being completely different from her. And me being me, I told her, I love your son much better than I liked you as a teacher. She would just laugh. She was glad. I think that her son was so popular so quickly as a teacher. So anyway, back to the story. So he came in, and one of the things he did was he said, if everyone behaved, did their work on Friday afternoons, we could listen to our music. And I was only in there for reading. I was in the resource room across the hall. However, I was allowed to go back over at the end of the day to listen to music. Anyway, so it's funny, my best friend and I are like, we want the Jets, and everybody's going, if you don't know who the Jets are, look them up. They were a Hispanic family of 10 kids who were a pop group, popular pop group in the late 80s. The typical, well, they weren't boys and girls, they would be the typical boy band, you know, kind of a group. And everybody's like, no, we want Bon Jovi. So, okay, I'll listen to this Bon Jovi. I knew nothing about it. And so people started bringing their boom boxes to school, and they would play Bon Jovi tape. Yes, tape. In fact, we still had records then. slippery when wet. On the playground. But the boys had a tendency to skip past this pretty song. I said, I just know it's on side 2. And my cousin happened to have the record. And his neighbor girl, who I usually didn't get along with, and I were sitting in his room. And I told him, I love that song, but the boys fast forward through it. And he said, and they both said, Without Love? And I said, no, that's on side A. This one's on side B. And my cousin was confused, and finally his neighbor girl said, I think she means Never Say Goodbye. And I said, that's it. That is a beautiful song. Never say goodbye. It's just beautiful. Busting out, we break their hearts together forever, never say goodbye. It's beautiful. I still know the words. At the prom that night. Yeah. I know all the words, but anyway. So we played it. It's like, that's the song, you know. The girls like songs like Never Say Goodbye, Without Love. The guys like the rockier songs, you know. That's just the way it is. So and that's kind of what connected me to my class a little bit. And then in junior high school, music continued to connect me with certain classmates. You know, by the time I got there, the most popular groups were Guns N' Roses. My father was a student of music, and he always amazed me with what he knew, even about more contemporary music, like Kurt Cobain. It was like, how do you even know who he is? You know, he's like, he is a very talented musician. Because I said to him, I said, the man can't sing. To me, you know, I just don't like his voice. He probably can carry a tune. I just don't like his voice. Just to make that clear to all of you. And that's what I said to my dad. He said, it's not about that. He is one of the most talented musicians. And my father was all about music. And I understand that now, because I am not a Guns N' Roses fan. I am not, I'm just not. But Slash is one of the most amazing guitarists. In fact, he's got a commercial right now. The Easy Decision commercial from one of the banks. And he's auditioning for a band. He's amazing. Matter of fact, he was on, what was that called? Where two families switch houses and decorate a room in each other's houses. Can't think of the name of it right now. We used to watch that. And he was on there. My parents both know who he was, and I said, "How do you know who that is?" My father said he's one of the most gifted musicians of our time. And I'm like, my mother's like, he's right. Everybody knows who he is. And I'm like, ugh. Yeah, the fact that my parents knew who Slash was just kind of, really? Anyway. I actually played a little bit on the show. Um, Trading Spaces, that's the name of the show. He knew one of the homeowners, and he managed him or worked with him in some way, and he showed up and helped a little bit. He played a song and stuff. Um, so yeah, but for my father to know who he was an extremely gifted musician. I'm like, yeah, but you shouldn't know who he is at all. But my father was a student of music. He studied, you know. He read, um, and all of that, so he knew. In fact, one night I walked and into the living room, and my father was watching, crap, the MTV show where they do all acoustics. Shoot, Unplugged, and it was Kurt Cobain. And that's when I said to him, "How can you listen to him?" He said, "It's not about the singing. He's an incredible musician." And I'm like, okay, you know, I'm like, my dad is watching Kurt Cobain on MTV. And granted, it was Unplugged. And my father watched Unplugged actually quite a number of times. um, so I learned to be a student of music. And that's one thing I found with Bon Jovi was, I don't remember which song it was now. I want to say it's Living on a Prayer, but I'm not sure. He sang, and then the music went off perfectly, went in perfectly as he stopped singing, so you didn't even realize he stopped singing because the music still sounded like he was singing. That's how perfect the music was. I remember one night, my mom sat with me. I don't know where my dad was. He might have been in and out of the room, more than likely. Or he had gone to bed early. I must have been in 6th or 7th grade. Yeah, probably 7th. And they were doing a special on network television with Bon Jovi. And a bunch of kids. Kids were asking him to play songs. It was all acoustic. It was just John and Richie. And my mother was floored. She's like, wow, they're so talented. They can sing, they can play. Richie's harmony with John is like nothing you could imagine. I mean, his harmony with John is amazing, the harmonies that he sings. And I have to give him major kudos. He left the group to go home and raise his daughter. Awesome. It says a lot about him as a man. And I give him huge kudos for that. You know, they're one of those groups that never split over drugs and alcohol and never really had major issues. John's been married to to his high school sweetheart for 40 years. Uh, you know, they're rare in rock and roll. Uh, and I remember when my parents took me to the mall to get slippery when wet in 6th grade. They sat on the bench in the hallway and let me go into Radio Shack. Yes, Radio Shack, in fact, used to sell music at one time. Thus the name Radio Shack. Yes, they sold audio equipment and other electronics, but they sold music. And they let me go in by myself. They wanted me to feel like the big girl I was. I was 12 years old. And they wanted me to spread my wings just a little bit, you know? And so they let me go in. I said, you know, there's a song on this. It's we trust you. You know? I was, of course, talking about social disease, where you have like the moaning in the beginning or whatever. And they didn't care. And I remember I was listening to it on my mother's stereo in her bedroom. And down comes the neighbor. I wasn't listening to it at that time. I want to make that clear. She's in tears. Well, it turns out her mother died the night before. And I said, oh my God, did I give her a heart attack with my music? She's like, no, honey, my mother was sick. But the fact of the matter is, her mother was the only one caring for her preschool-age son. So she found her mother died, rolled off the couch onto the floor, and her preschool-age son had been home alone most of the night while she worked with a dead grandmother. Which turned out to be the mother-in-law of the aide in my classroom in Sutton, who also turned out to end up working with my mother. And yeah, we knew each other very well. Still do. Well, if she remembers me. She has very severe dementia. She's currently in an Alzheimer's ward in a nursing home, unfortunately. Excuse me. It's funny. My mother and I, well, actually all of us, were watching a country music competition show. And one of the judges was Bret Michaels. It turns out Bret Michaels is a big country music fan. In fact, he's made a country album or two, which country radio has not played, which I do not understand. They'll play Kid Rock, but they can't manage to play Bret Michaels, who actually knows country music, surprisingly. He actually grew up on it. And while he likes rock, he also likes country. So, but yeah. And one night on the show, and my mother was liking him and liking his opinions and stuff. And one night on the show, he played an acoustic version of Every Rose Has Its Thorns. Because he had just put out his first country album at that time. And he played that song, and my mother fell in love with that song. I was like, well, I had a crush on this guy since I was 13 years old. No, this is not okay. I did play Poison for my dad once, in the tape deck in his car. I had set it up so it was at Your Mama Don't Dance and Your Daddy Don't Rock and Roll, because it's actually a cover of an old song. And my father said, you know what? They actually are really good. He said, it's a little rocked up, but they actually do a good job with the song. And I was like, score! you know? Uh, but I'm not a big heavy metal fan. Thus, Bon Jovi, Poison. I will say this. One of my friends, because I don't, Guns N' Roses is too loud. I don't mind Welcome to the Jungle, but they're just so loud. And my friend said, listen to this song. Oh, it's Guns N' Roses. I don't want to listen. It was Patience. And I'm going, who knew that guy could sing like that? That's like Ozzy. I was never an Ozzy person. He's so loud and screaming. It's just not for me. And then one thing I did was I started watching Behind the Music to learn about groups that I hadn't listened to before, you know? And in high school, my senior song was an Ozzy song. The, you know, our theme, you know, song for our prom. And I was like, are you nuts? And one of my girlfriends said, I thought the same thing, but listen to the song. It's about memories, and it's a really pretty song. And Ozzy actually has an incredible voice. Excuse me. Then I watched him on Behind the Music, and I actually got to hear some of the slower music. And it was like, wow, he really does have an incredible voice. And like I said, to hear Patience, and there was another song too that Axl Rose had. I believe it was on the same album. It was a slower song that one of my friends conned me into listening to. He actually has a pretty good voice too. But again, it's too loud. Most of it's too loud. And most of Ozzy is too loud. Most of Metallica is too loud. I won't say they're not talented, you know, and that's something that a lot of people in the generation above me, my parents' generation, think it's all noise. It's not, actually. There is a lot of talent. Metallica has a lot of talent. Lars Ulrich came here to the United States from Denmark at the age of 16 as a drum prodigy on his own. I mean, that's insane. And now he's a freaking Rock and Roll Hall of Famer. I mean, of course, the lead singer is very good. And I started hearing more groups in junior high school. Dokken, they were great. Kidding me? Skid Row. I think Sebastian Bach is fabulous. So I started hearing more of that. You know, and of course, growing up in the 80s, I knew who Billy Idol was and all that. Oh, funny one for you. My friend and I are watching a 70s Teen Idols marathon on Behind the Music while we're waiting for the pay-per-view to start, right? And I'm kind of reclined on my bed. He's sitting in a chair. And all of a sudden, I shot straight up when this next one started, before they said the name of the guy. I said, he's flipping gorgeous! Who is, I've never heard of him. Was Leif Garrett. So we walked out into the kitchen from my bedroom, and my friend is laughing because my friend knows all about Leif Garrett, evidently, because he's a student of music just like my dad. And I told my dad, I said, "Oh my God, he's hot." Who is this Leif Garrett? And my father said, "A kid who had a rough life." He said, "But you're not the only one, honey." He was a major heartthrob in the 70s. Because I told my father, I said, "I just shot straight up." And I was like, "Who is that?" And my father was laughing with Doug because he knew the history too. And he said, "You're not the only one. Every girl back in the 70s thought he was hot. But go watch it. He didn't have it easy." And turns out he's a recovering addict. He's doing very well now. But his voice, that voice, and that long, blonde, curly hair, and just beautiful baby face. And I was just like, it's just like with Bret Michaels, and I've told that story many times. The first time I heard him was in cooking class. Yes, cooking class. Well, home ec, and I heard him come through the radio because we were allowed to play a little radio. They had a little tape player in the middle and speakers on either side. It was about that big. A little handle, could work on batteries or a plug. And I was playing, and played the local rock station, which at that time was WAAF out of Worcester. WAAF has since changed their programming. I guess they got bought out, so their programming got changed because they were the local rock station. And I heard this voice. I said, "Who is that?" And they're like, "Poison." I said, "No, who is that voice?" And they said, "Bret Michaels." I said, "Does he look like he sounds?" And they said, "Better." I'm like, "There's no way he looks better than he sounds." And we're a bunch of giggling girls at the table. Mrs. Licapoli must have thought we were nuts. And God rest her soul. So anyway, we were at the table because we were getting our recipe for the day. We had these little brown, do you remember the little brown paper books that just had two staples in them? A brown thing folded over paper and two staples, one at the top and one at the bottom, in the non-existent binding. Yeah, all the binding was a brown paper wrapped around. Anyway, they were cheap notebooks that schools gave out. And so they were meant to be our cookbooks, So I went to the drugstore or the grocery store. Might have been the drugstore. Thought it was the grocery store. And went over to the magazines. Found the metal magazines, and I was like, I was looking for one with poison in it, and I saw Bret Michaels for the first time, and I was like, "Oh!" He really does look even better than he sounds. Ah. Damn it. Anyway, so I started buying those magazines and reading and learning. And David Lee Roth album, Skyscraper. Awesome. Of course, I only got to read the words to the songs. I loved that part of those magazines. You could read the lyrics. It was awesome. And I remember in 8th grade, this is going back a year, and Bon Jovi finally put out their follow-up to Slippery When Wet. That had come out in 86. 86, 87 was my 6th grade year. 87, 88 was my 7th grade year. So it came out during my 8th grade year, 88, 89. I was so excited. And that was New Jersey, of course. And I will tell you, oh, I wasn't the only one that was really excited about that. It was awesome, you know, and I got it as soon as it came out. So I learned to, and I think we do this. Our first exposure to music is our parents, and then our peers expose us to different music that they may have been exposed to by other peers, older siblings, whatever it is. So I think that's how we all learn music. Tell me if I'm wrong. I remember my music class in junior high school. He was actually also my chorus teacher. I love you, Mr. Russo. No relation to Mrs. Russo, who was my sped teacher in the little grades, like first through like kindergarten to third, something like that. She was the little grades, and I had one class with her later on. Oh, excuse me, I don't remember what I went in there for. I think it was just stuff for my fine motor skills. And I helped Becky. I've been teaching other students since I was in like 5th or 6th grade. That's amazing. Because, yeah, I was helping Becky Larson. And I'm pretty sure I was younger than Becky. But anyway. So anyway, that was a particularly good class. That I just got a picture. Actually, two pictures from Mrs. Russo of our class getting ready for a field trip. My mom was there. I'm like, that's my mom? Yeah, that's your mom. How did you convince my mom to chaperone a field trip? That was something my mom never wanted to do. You know, she'd bake goodies for the class and all sorts of things, but to chaperone a field and be there for field day, but to chaperone a field trip, I think she only did it because it was only the sped class, so it was just a small group. And because she really liked Mrs. Russo. But yeah. It was neat because I got to show one of the kids, because he actually works at Walmart. He has Down syndrome, but he does pretty well. I got to show him the pictures. So I took pictures of him with my phone so I could show them to him. I was in shock though when I got the card with those pictures in it and saw my mother. I'm like, I'm like, that's my mother. That can't be my mother. That's my mother. You know, that kind of, really? She told me where we went on that field trip, and now I can't remember. But she dug those pictures out of the archives somewhere. She's retired now, as most of my teachers are. In fact, one of my classmates is a teacher and actually taught some of our classmates' children. Which is kind of cool. Michelle Picard Wheeler. Hi, Michelle. So, anyway, I don't know why we got off on that tangent. Oh, because we were talking about learning about music from your peers. Excuse me. And it's cool, you know, to be able to do that and to bond with peers that way. I remember our neighbor when they moved to another place, and I was up on the third floor with her daughter. Her daughter and I hung out all night while our parents played cards and whatever. And we had so much fun. We listened to Dokken, we talked, we laughed, bonded over music, you know, and I think that can be a critical thing, you know. Excuse me. And I did want to tell you, speaking of music, when I was we used to go to this place in Webster, Mass. Called Indian Ranch. It gets way too full now. They had wooden benches, you know, and standing room only behind that. And we were at a show. It was, I think I was probably about 4 years old. Donna Fargo. And she's one of my favorite singers. And I have a distinct memory. She started singing her song Superman, which is an upbeat country song. And I stood up and was trying to dance, and like my 3-4-year-old self, and accidentally kicked my drink over. And I was kind of giggling, and she looked at me and smiled and tried not to laugh. And because you were close, you know, at those shows. And I never forgot that quick interaction that she probably never gave another thought to. You know, how much it meant to that child and to that adult 40-some years later. About 44 years later. And yeah, it was amazing. My mother remembers a lot more from the Indian Ranch than I do. I remember going there, and I remember seeing a few acts. We met Conway Twitty there evidently, but I don't remember it. He was very nice, my mother said. So that's pretty cool. I think she met Loretta Lynn there too. One time we were at, I believe she said it was Canopy Lake Park. Remember we talked about the amusement parks. And it was raining. My father was somewhere. Probably off at the mini golf. That's usually where he wound up, in the amusement parks. Him and his brother would wind up at the mini golf all day. And mom's got me on her hip because I'm just a baby. And it starts pouring. And she ducked under a tent. And then she's like, oops, this is the tent for the people who are doing the show. Because this woman comes up to her. So she ducks under a tent to get me dry. And she said, I went to back out because I saw Kitty Wells. And Kitty's like, no, come in here, honey, have a seat. And she thought I was the most adorable baby. Her husband was there, other musicians. So we were in the musicians' tent. I think we did see her show that day, which is one of the reasons we were there, I believe. But my mother didn't know she was ducking into the musicians' tent. She just wanted to get her baby dry. You know, she's a 20-year-old mom of a baby. Well, maybe 21. I might have been a year old. And Kitty Wells was so kind and so sweet. Very Southern lady. One of my favorite country singers, another one that's not as well known now, like Donna Fargo. She actually has MS, so she wasn't able to tour. She did continue to record because her and her husband, first of all, they own all of her written music under their publishing company, their label, Prima Donna. And so her husband of 50, 60 years is Stan Silver. And but another one that's not as well known today, it's actually second generation in the business. Her mom, Lynn Anderson, was also a singer. That was Liz Anderson. Liz died the same day, albeit at the age of 70 rather than the age of 61, as Roddy Piper. Unfortunately, surprisingly, Roddy Piper's death overshadowed hers. Who would have thought that? You know? You know, she was a country superstar in the 70s and early 80s. You know, and to have this wrestler actor's death overshadow hers. Don't get me wrong, I love Roddy, and I love the fact that they acknowledged his passing, because usually wrestlers don't get much of an acknowledgement, but because of who he was as an actor, he was acknowledged big time, and using knowledge all over the world, Canada, the UK, of course he was Canadian, and his mother was still alive when he died. She was very elderly, like in her 90s, I think. And she passed 6 months after he did. And I think it was probably a broken heart from losing her baby, because he was her baby. He was her youngest child. He was a surprise. He had two sisters that are like 10 years older than him, and all of a sudden he came along. So that had to be hard for her. And the fact that she couldn't, at 92 years old or whatever she was, get to Oregon for a funeral. You know, I'm sure they had something up there, you know, with his sisters and his mom, you know, brothers-in-law and nieces and nephews and whatever. But Um, but yeah, he kind of overshadowed Liz a little bit. That's what happens when two celebrities die on the same day, um, which is what happened with Michael Jackson and Farrah Fawcett. Farrah Fawcett was so brave and just so amazing. She was just inspirational. And to have her death overshadowed by Michael Jackson was just, that irritated my mother something fierce. And I agree. It was like, Michael Jackson, Michael Jackson, Michael Jackson. Oh, yes, and Farrah Fawcett passed away today. Michael Jackson, Michael Jackson, Michael Jackson. Oh, by the way, as a side note, Farrah Fawcett died. You know, and it's like, really? So, it was irritating. But anyway, that's how music works sometimes, you know? Um, and it's how fickle Hollywood is. Um, I think Roddy and Liz should have gotten equal airtime, and I think Farrah should have gotten more than Michael Jackson, but not overshadowed him. He was still a person, but at least equal airtime to Michael Jackson, you know? So, because she wasn't just an incredible actress, she was an incredibly brave woman. She was a mom. She put up one of the most courageous battles. And her and her best friend decided to film the last few months of her life. The courage to do that. Because she's not Farrah Fawcett anymore, you know? And I'm sorry, that should be acknowledged. Even though she's not a singer, I'm acknowledging it here. But thank you so much for joining me, listening to me rant about my favorite music. I think a lot of people are surprised because I'm into Christian and country music, but I also like rock. My Spotify will show you that. I have a Christmas music list, a Christian music list, a country music list, and a rock and roll list, which is mostly 80s. Because it's what I'm into. I don't know a lot of 90s, even though I was in high school in the early 90s. Belle Biv DeVoe, you know, they were good. Kind of thing. Bad Company were awesome. I think one of them just died. And there are a few others, but at any rate, for me, it's mostly about the 80s. Like I said, I hope you enjoyed this. I always say let me know in the comments, but nobody ever does. I'm lonely in my comments section. Thank you for joining me. Have a wonderful rest of your day. After this, we're going to make cranberry bread. I will see you for that. God bless you. Remember to subscribe. Bye-bye.